back to live theater again. I saw it at the Pantages. It was wonderful. I had good seats too. It was awesome. If you ever get a chance to see it live, it's absolutely worth the money.
Okay. How much was the money?
Huh?
How much was the money? Just out of curiosity.
Well, we were seated orchestra right center, so we were pretty close. And I think our tickets were like $90 each.
Oh, that's nothing.
It wasn't bad. No, it was not bad at all. And just a couple rows of us, the seats were like $100 more, but we weren't going to pay that. So
We used to have season tickets to the, they used to hold musicals at the San Gabriel Mission.
oh, right.
And
Okay.
a friend of ours was the musical director for all the shows. So we had seats right down in front, and we used to go 4 times a year for years. And then
Nice.
the whole thing collapsed. But that was so much fun doing that. Go to dinner, go to the show.
Well, and then I had to get the soundtrack and stick it on my phone so I can listen to it while during my long commute. I can listen to Hamilton.
There you go. Are we pretty well all set to go, Elvia?
Yep, I've got maybe a minute to go and we're all set. Everybody's present.
Okay, we got Kurt. Hey, Kurt, how you doing, bud? I guess that means he's doing good.
Yep.
Wait a minute. Got it. Okay.
He's on, there he is.
There I am.
There you go.
All right.
Hey,
Having some
Kurt.
technical difficulties.
All righty, so we're all set?
Mhm.
All righty. Okay, I now call the meeting of December 7th, 2021 at 7 p.m. For the audience tonight, I am the chair and serve as the presiding officer for tonight's meeting. Before we move forward, I'd like to announce that in response to executive orders issued by Governor Newsom, the city is conducting a teleconference public meeting utilizing Zoom video communications. This allows the city to continue to conduct essential business and comply with Public Health Administration recommendations to protect the public and city employees. Practice social distancing and limit exposure by not allowing in-person public meeting. To ensure that the public will be able to participate, public comments can be submitted as live comments during the Zoom meeting and via email at publiccomment@cityofglendora.org. Again, that's publiccomment@cityofglendora.org. At this time, I'd like to ask Madam Clerk to please take roll.
Thank you, Chair. At this time, I will conduct an oral roll call and request that each commissioner respond with present when their name is called. Commissioner Norwood,
Present.
Commissioner Arcetti,
Present.
Commissioner Becerra,
Present.
Vice Chair Koss,
Present.
and Chair Davis.
Present.
All commissioners are present. Thank you.
Okay, now we will do the Pledge of Allegiance. I would like to ask Commissioner Norwood to please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
All right. Place your hand over your heart, and I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the
And
republic
to the
for
republic
which it
for which it
stands,
stands,
one nation, under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty
liberty
and
and
justice
justice
for all.
for all.
Very good. Thank you, Commissioner Norwood. Okay, at this time, I would like to ask, does anyone wish to reorder and or add to the agenda tonight? Okay, seeing no hands, I will move on to the next section of public comments. Okay, at this point in time, I would like to open the public comment period. I invite members of the public to address the Planning Commission on items listed on the agenda. Announce the speakers are limited to 3 minutes. I just did. Speaking once and on and off on both on and off agenda items. This is your time to speak uninterrupted. Please address your comments to me, the presiding officer. Public comment is limited to 30 minutes. If you would like to request to speak, select the raise hand icon in Zoom before the close of the public comment period. You will then be called on when your turn is up to speak. Do we have any public comments? Have any public comments been received, Adam?
Thank you, Chair. At this time, we received no requests via the Zoom meeting or emails in the public comment email received.
Okay, so we have no hands raised at this time, so I will close the public comment period and move on to commissioner statements and reports. At this time, I'll invite each commissioner to provide a statement or report if you so do have one. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to attorney statements. I invite the Community Development Director, Mr. Kugel, to provide a statement.
I don't have any statements to make this evening. Thank you.
Okay, and the same goes for Attorney Lana Lehman to provide any type of statements.
None for me as well. Thank you.
Very good. We'll close that part of it. Special items, there are none tonight. So we'll move on to the public hearing. There are no public hearing items. Okay. All right, so that moves us right on down to commissioner agenda items. It appears there are no commissioner agenda
We've got
items.
the consent calendar that's right after the public hearing.
Oh, there it is. Yep. Okay, then I back up to the consent calendar. Do I have a request, a motion to, a motion for the request? Request a motion for the consent calendar.
I will move to approve the consent calendar.
Uh-oh.
Great. Is there a second?
A second.
I heard Commissioner Becerra. I will now take a roll call vote.
And just confirming this is for the consent calendar for November 2nd,
Correct, yes.
2021.
November
Okay.
2nd, commission minutes.
Just the approval of the minutes.
Yes.
Copy.
Okay. Commissioner Norwood,
Affirmed.
Commissioner Seti,
Yes.
Commissioner Becerra,
Yes.
Vice Chair Koss,
Yes,
and Chair Davis. Chair Davis, hold on. I think maybe his screen is frozen. We're going to try to reboot real quick. Hold on one sec. Okay, I think Chair Davis is going to have to log back in at this point. So we're going to wait until, we're going to give it maybe a couple minutes for him to log back in, and then we'll continue with the consent calendar item.
I think he's in the process of logging in.
We'll give it maybe another 30 seconds, and if not, we'll have Vice Chair Koss continue, okay? So we'll give it maybe another 30 seconds or so before we continue. I'm not getting a response on email.
He texted and said he's trying to log back in.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, there we go.
There he is.
Okay, I think
Okay.
I'm back. Am I
Yes.
back?
Yes, you're back.
Yes.
All right. Okay, so we were just waiting on your vote for the consent calendar.
Yes.
Okay, so now that passes 5-0. Thank you.
Sorry about that, folks. I don't know what happened. Okay, so let's see. All right, so we're at the commissioner agenda items. We have none. There are no commissioner agenda items. Unfinished business. There are no unfinished business items, which brings us to new business. Okay, so new business, we have appeal to reconsider the denial of a recreational vehicle administrative review permit number PLN 21-0031 at 550 Sycamore Avenue. All right, so I now invite Commissioner Associate Planner Natalie Espinoza to report, please.
Chair Davis, this is Jeff Kugel. This item has been was not noticed correctly, and so we would like to not hear this item tonight, or request that the commission not hear this item tonight under the agenda, so we can renotice it for a future meeting.
And further, Jeff, if I understand correctly, the appellant is not available.
That's correct.
Okay,
So at this point, we will continue the item.
so I guess, do we take a vote on continuing it, or we don't even have to do anything because it doesn't exist on this agenda
Right.
now?
I would take a vote to continue the item to a date certain, which it may be, Jeff, if we continue this to the next regular planning commission meeting, does that give us enough time for the notice?
Yes, that'd be January 4th.
So
Okay.
a motion would be to continue
I will-
the hearing, the item to January 4th.
Okay, I will motion to move agenda item number, permit number PLN 21-0031, 550 Sycamore Avenue to the January 1st, 2022 meeting,
Fourth,
It's January 4th.
January 4th.
I second.
And that was Kurt, correct?
Brian.
Brian, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, and there's no one opposed, and so we will continue it to January 4th.
All righty, so that moves us right along to item number 4, discussion of Senate Bill SB 9 policy framework. I guess I just read that into the record. So I would invite Senior Planner Hans Friedel to report. Hans, how you doing?
Okay, he's gonna unmute.
Good evening, commissioners. Doing well. In November, we provided the commission with an update on SB 9, which, as I mentioned then, was signed into law in September and takes effect January 1st, 2022, in about 3 weeks. As you recall, SB 9 allows for residential lot splits with up to 2 dwelling units per lot, or 4 total units. Next slide, please. Sorry. 4 total units in the area of the original lot, subject to certain criteria, limitations, and objective design standards. Importantly, these SB 9 applications are to be administratively approved without discretionary review or public hearings. At the meeting, we sought commissioner feedback on your major areas of concern, general direction on our local SB 9 policy, and feedback regarding staff's idea to treat second SB 9 units much like ADUs are treated under the current code. Next slide, please. At the meeting, though no action was taken, you communicated your preference to us that the city impose strong owner occupancy requirements, prohibit any variances or special exceptions, require safe and adequate access, and require off-street parking to the extent allowable. And then also, if we can, require landscaped areas for the future tenants of these SB 9 units. You'd asked us to return in December with the draft policy, and that we have. Next slide, please. Thank you. Staff's goal with this policy was to keep administration as efficient as possible while limiting adverse impacts to the extent possible and protecting neighborhood character. Our general concept is to allow one full-size primary dwelling unit per parcel and treat secondary units like ADUs under the current ADU code. All of these SB 9 units under this draft policy would be required to be architecturally compatible with the existing residents or with our design standards. Next slide, please.
Why was my?
The policy we drafted is pretty in-depth, so I'll go over some of the highlights here, but we can answer questions, discuss other items at the conclusion. The primary dwelling unit in this policy, again, it divides things into basically primary and secondary dwelling units for the SB 9 units. The primary unit can be a full-size house as allowed by the Florida area ratio under the current zoning, which is usually 35% in single-family zones. However, we put a provision in there that it would be reduced by 800 square feet to allow room for a second dwelling unit if they want to do their second SB 9 unit. So even if they only apply for one unit under SB 9, basically we'll get as close as we can to the existing Florida area ratio by reducing it by that amount. The primary dwelling unit in our proposal would have 4-foot side and rear setbacks, which is the maximum extent allowed under the state law. Underlying front setbacks would be the same as in the existing zoning. And in our proposal, the primary dwelling unit could be a 2-story house with development plan approval, just like under the existing, any house under the current zoning code. With the draft policy, secondary dwelling units would be treated basically the same as ADUs today, as I mentioned, which is they can be up to 1,000 square feet in size, but only 800 if the Florida area ratio is exceeded. So it's kind of a performance system that we came up with that can vary based on the lot. Secondary units also have the same 3-foot side and rear setbacks as ADUs under the current code and must meet the existing front setback in the current zoning. We do propose a single-story height limit on SB 9 units or 16 feet, or maximum height not to exceed 16 feet. Next slide, please. In terms of parking, so some other highlights here will require 1 space per SB 9 unit unless it's within 1/2 mile of a major transit stop. We only anticipate this being the Glendora Metrolink station when it's open. We propose requiring SB 9 units, as I mentioned, to match the existing architecture. If there's no units and the lot isn't being split, then we're proposing that the applicant choose from an architectural style found in the code and are commonly found in Glendora and adhere to that. So it could be, craftsman or mid-century modern, and then they'll adhere to those cues that we have in the code. Next slide, please. Per commission feedback, we propose requiring 200 square feet of landscaped area per SB 9 dwelling unit. With kind of a caveat, I'll mention that this may have to be reduced to afford 2 minimum 800 square foot units, which is the sort of minimum that the law allows. This should provide some space for residents to enjoy being outside and, of course, accommodate pets if they have pets, and kids too. In terms of protections with lot splits, we will require applicants, or we're proposing to sign an affidavit that they intend to live on site for 3 years under penalty of perjury. And per your feedback, the draft policy expressly states that no variances to SB 9 standards will be available. You either meet them or you don't. So in that sense, there's not a way to sort of get the setback down to 1 foot or something like that, unless you have, non-conforming use that's exempted in SB 9. We're also proposing trying to prevent SB 9 lot splits on completely undeveloped land due to the residency requirement. In other words, you can't really sign an affidavit that you're going to live on an undeveloped parcel if there's no house or structure there from the time we approve the permit. We also propose requiring deed restrictions prohibiting expansion of SB 9 units past what's allowed, additional lot splits, which the state says you can't do, and short-term rentals under 30 days. Next slide, please. The commission asked us to explore inclusionary housing or affordable housing as it relates to SB9 at the last meeting. We did do this. We will need direction from Planning Commission and or council on whether to require this in the future. It was determined that in order to have an inclusionary policy with SB9 units, it would have to be done through an ordinance, which is not something you could do through just a policy document, which is what we're with here tonight. So we could do this later when we come back with an ordinance sometime next year. One idea we discussed, amongst ourselves was requiring secondary SB9 units to be deed restricted, inclusionary, or affordable. We do have some concerns, though. We need to kind of explore some of the implications of that further. Next slide, please. So I've created some better, I think, graphics to kind of illustrate our proposed SB9 policy as drafted and kind of what it would look like in action. So there's got a couple of different scenarios here, and I hope you can see these okay. The first scenario here, we have an irregular 50-50 lot split of roughly 8,000 square foot lot into two lots. One's of the back lot, if you will, is kind of a flag lot to provide access to the street. Some things to notice here is that these are detached units in the back. There's 3 total units. There's a primary and secondary in the back. There's 2 parking spaces, and we have designated landscape areas per this draft policy document. And you'll see the access kind of along the left there for the cars to get to that back lot where there's those 2 detached units, the primary and the secondary. And you'll also see the setbacks as well on this graphic. Next slide, please. Okay, so in this scenario, scenario 2, which is kind of an updated graphic that I had last time, we have a larger lot. It's just over 12,000 square feet, and it's basically split right down the middle into 2 50-50 portions. We have on the left two dwelling units, a new primary, which is as big as they could make given the existing zoning. And notice again, it meets the front setback here and side setback as well. And then we have a new secondary dwelling unit in the backyard. And all the new stuff's on the left side. On the right side, we have an existing house and then another new secondary unit in that backyard. So here where we had one house before and maybe a detached garage or something, we now have the total of 4 dwelling units, the max allowed under SB9. We have parking, landscaped areas, and everything meets setbacks that we have in the policy. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is scenario 3 here. Here we have something we talked about last time, which is that idea that there's no lot split. So in this case, the applicant, homeowners, invoked SB9. They have their existing house and an existing ADU, and they're proposing doing a new secondary dwelling unit under SB9, which we treat just like an ADU here. In this case, it can only be 800 square feet because they're over their floor to area ratio. And then there's a new junior accessory dwelling unit per the ADU law inside the main house. So we have a total of 4 units, 2 parking spaces, maximum landscaped area we could fit, and everything meets the either ADU or SB9 setbacks, which are basically the same for the units in the back. Again, total of 4 units, basically the same number of units if they had split this lot.
Less parking though.
Next slide, please. Okay, this is kind of an interesting scenario that can happen. I call it scenario 4. This is one where the back lot is completely landlocked in the SB9 split. And SB9 says you can allow that and do that. And so it basically says you don't have to have the lot fronting a street right of way, but we can require access. And so in this case, the access is a private access easement shown off to the right to provide vehicular access to the lot in the back. This is basically an example where we have 2 duplexes to get the 4 units. And so all my other examples were basically detached. This one is 2 attached units, if you will. for a total of 4 once again. Meet the setbacks. They've got the required parking. There's landscaped areas. And yeah, you sort of again, roughly a proportionate or close to 50-50 lot split in this scenario. And we can come back to these if we want to discuss them more. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, the policy we have or don't have will go into effect January 1st when SB 9 goes into effect then. So we are seeking your confirmation of this draft policy framework with the idea to kind of look before we leap into a full ordinance, which we do expect to draft sometime later, maybe mid 2022. We'd be happy to report back to the Planning Commission, perhaps middle next year with an update on the number of SB 9 applications we've processed and any issues or lack thereof with the policy we have in place. With that, we look forward to your feedback and comments, and thank you.
Okay, Hans, thank you very much. Bring it back to the commission here. First, I want to ask you, Hans, just to kind of set the stage. This document is a living document up until even maybe past the point of it being approved or being policy. So we can contribute to it, subtract from it as we go.
I think so. Basically, I think that's the case with policy, as long as it's not in, and Lana may want to weigh in on this, but as long as it's not in conflict with the state law, which is SB 9. Yes, I think we can make modifications to it if something's not working.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. If something dawns on us about parking or landscaping or something, we can bring that back to commission and feed it to you.
Sure, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So it's a bit of a living document until it becomes law, so to speak.
Yes.
Okay. Well, at this point, I'll bring it back to an ordinance. Yeah. Okay. At this point, I'll bring it back to the commissioners. I'd like to ask Commissioner Norwood, what do you got?
I have a couple questions for staff on the floor area ratio. You mentioned that you would reduce the primary residence by, let's say, 800 square feet so let's say a 10,000 square foot lot, 35%, you could build a 3,500 square foot structure, but you would reduce that by 800 feet in the event they want to add an 800 square foot second unit or ADU in the future? Or was that how I heard that?
Yes, that's exactly correct, that example. So let's say they started with, that's a good one, a 20,000 square foot, just for the sake of mental math, lot, and they split it into two 10,000 square foot lots. And on one lot, let's say there were no houses and they proposed to do a primary house, we would let them go up to that 3,500 square feet minus 800, even if they didn't propose that second unit under SB 9, basically. So in that, it's a way to sort of get as close as you can to the Florida area ratios and also prevent a scenario where, maybe someone tries to game it by piecemealing an application where they get as big a house as they can and then invoke their second dwelling unit later to kind of blow past the Florida area ratio when we could have limited them if they had done it at once.
So obviously we would have documentation. So 20 years down the road, they chose to do their full 35% floor area ratio, and they came back 20 years later and said, we want to put 1,000 square foot ADU. We would have that documentation saying, no, this property is maxed out in terms of their floor area ratio.
We will have the documentation. We will record the units, and that's basically why we have this written as proposed. So they couldn't really get to that scenario. So their 3,500 square foot home application, if they did the SB 9 lot split, would be limited to, do it in my head, 2,700 square feet.
Okay, so we would subtract it. So we would subtract the ADU or the second unit right off the top in the event they come back later.
That's correct. And hence that other provision that then the deed restriction would say they can't expand that primary unit past that. So that they can't, make it a 2,900 unit over the years or 3,000 incrementally. So, yeah, so they basically have that frozen so that if they want to do a second unit, they're limited to 800 square feet. It could
Well,
be attached.
that was my second part of the question is, we allowed on ADUs up to 1,000 square feet. And I know the law, the minimum is 800 square feet, but we had allowed the ADUs to go up to 1,000. So are we still keeping the ADUs at 1,000 and limiting the second units under SB 9 at 800 square feet? Or are we allowing both to go to 1,000 or reducing one? I was a little confused on that.
Yeah, so the relationship between them is kind of interesting. So the way the ADU law is now, they have an applicant is allowed or homeowner up to 1,000 square feet of a detached structure. So if they have a 400 square foot garage, if you will, and they want to keep it, then really that limits their detached ADU to 600 square feet. Now,
Gotcha.
we do allow, make it a little more complicated, we do allow exempting 400 square feet of garages from the floor to area ratio, but that still applies to that total number. So if they had let's say in this example, if they had a 1,000 square foot ADU and an existing house of whatever size, and they didn't split the lot, because if they split the lot, you can't have an ADU and an SB 9 unit. So it would just be one or the other at that point. But if the
Gotcha.
lot was unsplit and they were up at their limit in terms of floor to area ratio, so let's say they're at 40%, then that would basically limit their SB 9 unit to 800 square feet, the second unit. And the same kind of works for the ADU thing too. If they're over their floor to area ratio already, we can limit, and let's say they don't have any garages or sheds or detached stuff, we could limit that second ADU to that maximum allows 800 square feet.
Okay. Another question I had was on the undeveloped lots. You basically can't split that under SB 9. But if they come in and request to split a lot that has a structure on it, and they choose to scrape that structure and basically, can they now have two basically undeveloped lots?
Well, in that scenario, so that's an interesting one. There are other protections in there. So let's say in this scenario, there's no renters in the last 3 years. It wasn't withdrawn from ownership in the last 15, that kind of thing, and they can scrape it. In that case, then they would have to, the way we have it written, that's actually kind of interesting. And we could tweak this or change it based on your feedback. They could match the architecture of what was existing for the all new buildings. They could have 4 new units. So let's say it was a craftsman home, wasn't historic, which we wouldn't let them do SB 9 in the historic district anyway. And they scrape it. Then a craftsman style home, let's say, then they could do 4 new units of craftsman style that meet the sort of design guidelines in our code. Another way to interpret it, and we could tighten this up or change this, is they could propose some other, let's say the house existing was not a good example of local architecture vernacular, and we didn't really want it replicated, and they scraped it. They could basically propose then some other architectural style commonly found in Glendora, and then all 4 homes would have to fit that.
All
that
right,
might
but
be, on those kind of scenarios, might be a better choice, honestly.
Yeah, but we wouldn't go back and say that this is now, especially since the lot's already been split and that we wouldn't go back and say they're undeveloped. We can't unsplit the split, right?
That's what I mean. Yeah, I would think in that case, yeah. That's
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And on the affordable housing concept, aren't there laws or already things on the state law and on the books that allow certain developers certain affordabilities or leeways in building affordable housing that might be in conflict with SB 9? So you know what I'm saying on that, where they jump in and say, well, yeah, we're going to do, you're making us do affordable housing on the second unit, so we want to build multiple units, because state law says on affordable housing, we can go down this path now.
Yeah, and that's a good point that you bring up, and something we need to explore. I was alluding to that we need to explore further between now and when we do an ordinance, because there is what I think what you're talking about is a density bonus, and there's
Right.
density bonuses, in the state law. So we don't really know the relationship of that yet with SB 9. Like if you require all units to be affordable or some
Hans,
percent.
I'll just jump in real quick. I think I do have the answer to that, and these lot splits would not be eligible for bonuses.
Do they not meet the minimum number of housing units in total?
That's
Okay.
correct. That's correct.
Nice.
Looked at that.
Okay. And then my last question, if you can go back to scenario 1 and clarify something for me.
Yeah, can we, yeah, thank you.
Okay, but you went, there you go. So on scenario 1, you have I thought that answered my question. So the primary unit can't be less than 800 square feet, but the secondary unit can be less than 800 square feet.
Well, we can't tell, that's a good point. We can't tell them that the units have to be less than 800 square feet to meet some Florida area ratio or landscape area. In this case, though, some may be just to make it work and look, fit, just like we have people apply for ADUs that are, 500 or 600 square feet. So in this case, I drew that second one at 700 just to make it fit on the lot. I was trying to do my drawings to scale. But yeah, it could be 800 square
I
feet.
thought that but I see the primary unit is 800 square feet. So that's the minimum. And then the floor area ratio, we could reduce the secondary unit to a certain degree. And then the last question I have is can you go over, you talked about the historic districts that are exempt. What other areas are exempt?
So one thing on this scenario, if I may, before we go to that, is basically in this scenario, because that second lot with the parking and landscaped areas like at its Florida area ratio limit or over, none of these units could be bigger than 800 square feet. So if this was, it's the way I drew it. If this was a larger lot, maybe the primary unit could be 1,000 and the second would be, capped at 800 in that example. But in this case, yeah, that's just kind of how it fit. In terms of areas that can be exempted, so you mentioned historic districts, historic designated properties. It does talk about the other kind of area is sort of talks about seismic areas, high fire zones, environmentally sensitive areas, critical wildlife habitat by reference, and floodplains, floodways, and essentially areas that have some sort of critical environmental hazard. Now, I will mention though, with the way it's worded, things like fire, the very high fire risk zones, it does say unless mitigated. So in that case, and I think we talked about that a little bit last time, we would have to require, or would, if they wanted to do an SB 9 unit in a high fire area, full mitigation, like full fire with driveways and streets, which may make it completely impractical, if they didn't have that already. It'd have to get basically approved by the fire marshal to meet full building code, fire code, and fire access. So it might be sprinkler and all sorts of stuff.
Okay, that's all my questions for now. I want to hear the other commissioners' questions before I make some final comments on it. So I'll turn it over to back to Chair Davis, and I'll chime in later with my comments after I hear some of the other stuff too that might change my thinking on some of this.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kurt. Okay, Commissioner Becerra.
Well, I think that we have to put in a policy. So we need to work quickly to get this put together. Otherwise, we're going to be vulnerable to whatever someone wants to do based on the state requirements. I think that you've done a really good job putting this together. I don't see anything that comes out at me right away that I think you did a really good job with this, 100%. I don't have any comments.
Okay, and then moving on, Commissioner Cost, Vice Chair Cost, sorry.
Yeah, I also appreciate the presentation you've done. I think it's very well done. I think it's a very well thought out plan. Couple of questions that I had regarding, we talked about not having any exemptions, and I know we had talked about, and I know you mentioned it in your presentation, but then you talked about some exemptions for, you know, different, like if it didn't conform and landscaping and those kinds of things. So what kind of exemptions, because I think at the last meeting, we talked about having as few exemptions as possible, like you either meet the criteria or you don't. And so I would really like to see us stick to that as much as possible.
Sure, and perhaps I misspoke. So in terms of exemptions to what's written, there's really none.
Okay.
What the state law sort of says, though, is that existing nonconformities, you have, so like maybe the existing house doesn't have any parking or something like that.
Okay.
Then you can't deny an SB9 application because the existing structure is non-conforming with the code. So that's one thing there, which I was talking about. And then the second thing was in terms of the landscape area, let's say in particular, it's written such that we can have objective design standards, objective standards, in as much as they don't prohibit you from having your minimum 2 800 square foot units. So basically, like if you have a, let me do the math here, 1,600 plus 400, right? Like a 2,500 square foot lot, then to get parking, we might have to reduce the landscape area to 100 square feet, that kind of thing. So basically we have to be willing, and there's a provision somewhere down near the bottom of the policy there that basically says where there's some conflict or where something in here prohibits 2 minimum SB9 units, then that has to budge basically to allow you to get those units. So that's really kind of the only exceptions to the policy that could occur. But you know, ideally, if most of our lots are a little bigger in Glendora, and you know, they can't get an exception just because they want one or a variance to those standards, if you will.
Okay.
And if that happened, the other thing is they would be limited to minimum units, 800 square feet.
Okay. And then the other question I had involved the affordable housing. Now, I know you said that we're going to have to actually come up, we can't really affect that in this actual policy, that we actually have to come up with ordinances for that. But it's not, did I understand you correctly, Jeff, that these would not be subject to any kind of incentives or any building incentives, density incentives, anything like that?
That's right.
Okay.
We looked at the density. We were concerned, or one of the questions we asked is if we had an inclusionary or affordable requirement for any of the units, would they be eligible for a density bonus or concessions under the state density bonus law? And so we consulted the city attorney, and actually in looking at the law again, you have to have a minimum number of units, and I think it's 5 to get a density bonus. And so these projects would not be subject to or benefit from any density bonuses under the state law.
Okay. And I know it's beyond the scope of what we're able to do tonight, but I would like to see us explore that ordinance for affordable housing. I don't think there's necessarily a housing issue in California. I think it's an affordable housing issue. And I think, you know, we need to do what we can in Glendora to try to support that. So I know that's beyond the scope of our discussion tonight, but I would like to see us pursue that if possible, an ordinance. And that's really the only other comment that I had.
Okay, all righty, Vice Chair Cost. Commissioner Ursetti.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to staff for that report, Hans. Really detailed, especially all the stuff that was in the agenda packet as well, reading through that. I did have a couple questions. One was this law goes into effect, the SB 9 does on January 1st. And we're looking to put this policy in place in kind of the beginning of January 2022, as you stated. What happens in that meantime before we agree and come up with a firm policy on this for the people that are, because I assume they can start applying as soon as January 1st for, well, City Hall will probably be closed on January 1st, but after that, they can start coming in. And so what happens with that?
Well, our goal was based on your feedback tonight on this draft policy was to take the next 3 weeks or however long it is and try to, make any changes based on the feedback you provide, tighten some things up, get our sort of packet together for an application, some affidavits, things like that. And so that the goal is when the city hall opens on January 2nd, that we're ready with the policy when somebody comes in. We have people now coming in almost daily or calling with questions about SB 9, which we have to kind of, I usually field them, direct them to sort of what the state law is, with the caveat that we're still working out what our policy is going to be within the latitude the state gives us to regulate and have standards. So the idea really is to have something ready so that doesn't happen, that somebody doesn't apply January 2nd or 3rd or whatever. We don't, not sure what to do.
Gotcha. And then I just had a clarification question. So it looked like in the chart you sent us in the agenda packet, so people can do this with either lot splitting or non-lot splitting. They can get up to 3 places for if they don't split the lot and 4 if they do. Is that correct?
So basically it's 4 units either way. So if they do split the lot, it's 2 units per lot for a total of 4, and that's within the area that was the original lot. If they don't split the lot, then they can have 2 SB 9 units, just like if they had split the lot. But then the way SB 9's worded is it doesn't then sort of exempt them out of the ADU ordinance or ADU law. So then if they didn't split the law, they could have their 2 SB 9 units and then an ADU and a junior accessory dwelling unit per the current ADU law and our standards. So again, the total is 4 in the same area if they split the lot or not.
Okay, so what would be an incentive? I'm just trying to look at, and if they do split the lot, that's a new parcel number through the county, through the city, and everything else, and a new property tax bill for them. So what's an incentive that people would have to even split the lot at this? Not that you can read their minds, but do you foresee it being more people non-lot splitting or lot splitting?
That's an interesting question. We've talked about that quite a bit. I mean, some of the incentives for, not splitting a lot is the cost and difficulty of going through it's a parcel map basically. So you've got SB 9 says the only thing it basically takes them out of is the discretionary hearing part of that process. And then also the requirement under subdivisions that cities are allowed to require offsite improvements. But other than that, they have to hire a surveyor, there's fees, they have to get will serve letters from utility providers. There's all kinds of stuff that entails that adds complexity, money, and time. So an incentive maybe to, split it is as you mentioned, they could sell the second lot. You make money that way. And if it's improved with 2 houses, that could offset the cost and time and difficulty. Could be, pretty lucrative perhaps. But conversely, if an incentive to not split the lots is you still get the same total number of dwelling units, but you don't have to go through that extra process of that a subdivision of land entails and all that other, application and those kinds of things. It also certain scenarios, maybe where the access or the shape of the lot or where the existing house is located, might make splitting a lot into equal portions or roughly equal portions just sort of impossible. And there's probably quite a few lots in Glendora like that are kind of small already and have a pretty big house on them. And so that would be an incentive perhaps to not split a lot because it just doesn't make sense or would be extremely difficult. Involve a lot of demolition.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Another consideration is the fact that if you split the lot, you may have to get a authorization from any lien holder or mortgagee that owns the lot, that has an interest in the lot, which is a hurdle for those who have a mortgage on their property or any kind of lien on their property. And that would be a standard process that is already implemented and required for these type of parcel maps.
Yeah, that won't be easy.
And part of our paperwork, good point, Lana, is that we also have like an ownership affidavit. So if there is some sort of lien holder or interest or something like that, basically there's another affidavit that they have to give their consent to do this. And that's probably a pretty big hurdle for somebody in terms of splitting.
And my last thing was, and if you covered it and I missed it in the agenda, I apologize, but is there something that triggers a new assessment on the property value if they're adding all of this stuff? I'm just thinking if we're adding, three more units on a piece of property or dividing it into, that's a higher demand on city services. And if something triggered a property tax assessment to where some of that cost for the city could be recouped and for services.
That's so as far as we don't really set it's the assessor's office that would do the reassessment, but our concern, and one of the notices we have, it's kind of a beware thing in our advice in that policy, is that if FYI, if you do this, you might very likely trigger a reassessment of your property based on the increased improvements, the extra lot. You may lose or be reassessed and lose your old Prop 13 tax rate, and that changes of use do that too. So there's a couple of things that could happen. So yeah, it could have pretty significant tax consequences on somebody who goes through this process.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all from me.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Rossetti. I can tell you just the sewer hookups alone will trigger an assessment. Okay, I got a few questions. I'm going to lead with parking right now. Is there any formula to determine how many cars, how many spaces are needed per square foot of dwelling? Or is it based on bedrooms, faucets, sewer hookups? What is the standard for that?
Well, it varies, somewhat by jurisdiction, but typically with residential, it's based on number of dwelling units or dwelling unit equivalency, and that's kind of how we are. Multifamily, sometimes like large apartments, it would be like bedrooms or some other types of things. It's commercial property that typically does the space per some square foot, like 1 per 250 square feet, something like that.
Okay, well, and the reason I asked that is just given the scenario one that you have up there right now, I'm reasonably sure you're going to have 2 people in the existing house. You're probably going to have 2 people in the back house. You're probably going to have 1 at least, and possibly 2 in the secondary unit. That's a total of 6. I only see spaces for 4. My biggest question here is, where's the overflow going?
So the state basically, it's a good question. The state says, we can only require 1 space per SB9 unit. So in this case, it's the maximum. This is not probably the answer you want to hear, but it's actually 1 space over what the maximum would be. I just kept the existing house with the 2. It would be 3 because there's 3 units.
I get your point, but
yeah, we don't allow parking on street in Glendora. So it's one of the things, I'll mention this, that when people have talked to me about it, and even when we do ADUs, which we don't have to require parking for now, that, if they are doing a garage conversion, somebody walked in the other day with an application for that, it's something I did talk to them about was, hey, this is going to affect your leasability of this space if you have no parking and you can't park in the alley or on the street. So, and they're like, oh yeah. And so they, consider parking, but it's kind of an advice thing. It's not something that we can require beyond that minimum amount or ratio, if you will.
And I guess that was Yeah, you're right. That's not the answer I want to hear. No, because if the police are doing their job and enforcing, parking laws, then parking is going to get pushed onto the street. People are going to get ticketed, and it's going to be a free for all of at City Hall in a council meeting one of these days. All right, so define how would a new secondary unit or a new primary unit be considered low income? What would make it low income? The rent?
Well, yeah, there's two factors of it here. Is there's going to be the amount that can be charged in terms of rent based on some income bracket, and then the criteria under which the income bracket that it's established under. So there's, like in California, there's very low income, moderate income. It's like 30, 80, and 120% of area median income. So whatever the ordinance targets in terms of, it has to be low income, let's say, and then they would have to qualify under that 80%, and then the rent would be indexed and limited according to whatever that number is for median income.
And whose shoulders does that fall upon to verify that and quantify that?
That's a great question. If we had such a requirement, there would have to be some sort of way for us to basically, that to be administered and that checked.
Okay.
You would have
There's deed restriction would be one thing. You could deed restrict something to be for, sometimes it's for like a determined period of time. So like some places have deed restriction affordable units for 20 years or 50 years or something. So and then it expires at some point. Others are indefinite.
That's what I was going to say. What keeps low income? What's to prohibit owners from saying, it's already been 5 years, they're not looking, I'm going to raise the rent?
Yeah, it would be typically deed restricted, so it's legally bound, so they can. And then, if they did that, then typically the renters or the people in there would let us know or complain, or just housing advocacy group.
Whose shoulders does the deed restriction fall upon?
Well, it would be between the owner and the land and the city. Basically, it would be recorded, at the county, and then we would get a copy of it.
Hans, do we have a housing department in the city of Glendora?
Yeah, we have Valerie, who works next to me here. She sort of manages our inclusionary housing and housing. So there would be that's a great question in the sense that we would have, there's a whole administration side of something like that if we were to do that.
No, and if I could jump in, so just for your information, Veronica, so to the extent that the city has any activity currently with respect to affordable housing, it's really, it pertains to monitoring some units that were built when the city had a redevelopment agency. When the redevelopment agencies were done away with in California, that was the primary source of affordable housing to both finance it as well as fund city monitoring and administration. And that largely went away in Glendora when redevelopment ended. So it's really a part of one person's job is to monitor the legacy programs of the redevelopment agency. So I think to Mark's point, if the council or the commission decide to recommend something like an inclusionary ordinance, it creates a whole requirement to generate, create, have administrative capacity and expertise that we no longer have within the city. So it would definitely create, some costs, both financially and in acquiring expertise somewhere to administer affordable housing programs. They're not the easiest things in the world to administer.
Thank you. The other part of that is, what would be the incentive for someone to go ahead and want to do the affordable component to this? That would be difficult to push on a single family property owner, right? I don't know how we do this affordable housing for these units.
I wonder if you could make some kind of requirement for, the second unit. We might have to get a little creative with how we do that, but I agree, it will be a bit of a challenge, but I do think it's worth exploring.
Yeah, traditionally, affordable housing is produced, on a small scale. There's a very small number of developers out there who do it. You've got Habitat for Humanity, for example, but there aren't very many organizations like that. There more commonly, affordable housing is produced by large, companies that are developers that have institutional financing, such as tax credits that can build larger scale projects, 100 units, 200 units, and so forth, to make it, financially viable for those investors.
And then they are committed to providing that affordable component for up to 55 years. And it's regulated and protected through the housing department of whatever city it is.
Correct.
Or county.
Correct.
Yeah, some cities have housing authorities and things like that. In fact, the last one I came from, there was a whole separate housing authority within the city. This whole job was tasked with managing and developing those kinds of properties.
And the affordable housing, if we were to impose it as a requirement, notwithstanding any limitations we may have in enforcement, it would be a deed restriction or some sort of covenant that would show up on the title of the property. So that in terms of transferring the property, that still stands as a matter of record in transferring the property.
As affordable housing or low income.
Right.
That's correct.
Okay, all right.
Whatever category it's deeded for.
Hans, can an ADU be a second story?
We limit it to, it's our current ADU ordinance, it's 1 story or 16 feet. And that's 1 story not to exceed 16 feet, not 2 short stories.
So you couldn't do a 2-story house with the stacked?
No, you could have a JADU in that house somewhere, that meets our standards for that, but they're smaller, it's fine. Basically, it would just have a separate entrance to the outside, is all you would see. And then there's some stuff inside, like, has to have its own kitchenette, but can share a bathroom. So it's like a standalone ADU, or the way we've written this SB9 unit, that's 2 stories. No, you could not.
Okay. I'm not sure I have my numbers correct. You talked about 200 square feet of landscaping. I'm not sure if that was just in one of your scenarios or if that was part of the draft ordinance here. I'm not sure if you've thought of this, or much the way we limit structure size to a % of the lot coverage. Maybe possibly do the same thing with the landscaping. That may allow you to avoid any of the conflicts with an ADU not being eligible at 2 different levels, size of the structure versus the landscaping. One has to give the other. So maybe if you had a bit of a floating scale with the landscape versus how many square feet are being covered, maybe that flows right along perfectly, or maybe not. Just a thought.
Like a ratio of some sort?
A ratio of some sort.
% or something. Yeah, we could look into that. I could play around with these examples and see if we could come up with something that got, an adequate amount, significant landscaping, that maybe some minimum amount or something like that.
It may be easier to adhere to as you run into some of those things and say, well, if you adjust this, this adjusts down. If you adjust this up, then this adjusts down. And a sliding scale of sorts may help you, instead of just saying, well, we have to reduce the landscaping to make this unit fit. Maybe it automatically will through the sliding scale.
Sure. Yeah, we can explore that, like a performance metric of some sort.
Yeah.
Hans, the state law requires 200 square feet of landscaping, but can be altered if the 800 square foot house could not be built. But that maybe that would help what Commissioner Davis is exploring also. Can you cover that one more time?
Sure. So that was something that we had added in at the request of commission last time. It's not something that's in state law, the landscaping
all
component.
right.
So it would be one of those things that would, you've got basically the things you've got is you've got the house, the units, you've got parking, and then you've got access, like a driveway or something, and then easements, and then the sort of setback. So we added another thing when basically I made it so that it was objective, an objective standard for landscaping. So it's not required by state law to answer that question. It was something we imposed in there as a.
So the landscaping would be sacrificed in certain cases to adhere to state law.
Possibly, if the lot was that small that you could all, that 800 square foot units and parking didn't allow for 200 square feet or 400 in this case of landscaping, that's all it could give. Or you would start going vertical at that point. You could have 400 square feet of landscaping, but then you're going to 2 stories or something.
Right.
Hans, I have a question. This goes into effect on January the 1st. How long do we have before we have to have a committed ordinance?
We were thinking, that's a good question. And Lana may want to chip in on that. We were thinking of targeting something, middle of next year to basically give us time to work with this policy to see what works and what doesn't, as we kind of talked about earlier before we, codify it and have to live with that for a while. So it gives us kind of a test phase, if you will, to sort of work out this policy. And then eventually the idea, and you probably noticed, I think somebody referred to it earlier, that we wrote the policy in such a way as it's sort of the framework of a future ordinance.
So do you think you can bring it back to us every month and let us know how many applications there are to build an SB 9 and just kind of let us know how it's going? Because we may be in a situation where we see one or maybe because it doesn't fit, right?
Or not, none even.
Or none. So
would you want, is that something you would want, Commissioner, every month, or maybe like in 2 or 3 months, like a quarter, to kind of give us the time to accumulate some history with them?
I think I'd like to see it in January because everybody's kind of chomping at the bit for this. And then after that.
Our meeting is January 2nd though. So I would look in February to February or March.
Jan 2nd is kind of soon. Yeah.
The other thing, commissioners, to remember is when someone does submit an application. So let's say
Or
they
fourth,
submit
I'm sorry.
a policy in place, and what's likely to happen is because there is no application out there for this just yet. So I don't expect getting a complete, what we would deem a complete application, all their affidavits. It's kind of almost impossible, like January 2nd or 3rd, right? They're going to have to talk to us and that, figure that out. But once we do, whatever that is, get a complete application, assuming we get one, it's got all their stuff, all the affidavits, complete plans, all that, owner's authorization, et cetera, et cetera. If it's a lot split survey, well, the other thing is the will serve letters from the utility provider. So that's another, that's a pretty big hurdle there. When they
Preliminary title report, right?
Yeah, we have 30 days to, admit on administrative applications to basically provide them our comments. So before we actually see a complete application, it's like ready to go, and we can say, yeah, we can approve this or get this in process. It's minimally probably a month from January, whatever we're open, 2nd or 1st, and then yeah.
Okay. I'm just thinking people are going to start coming in and having questions about different things, and we want feedback from the applicant, see what it is that they're looking to do if there's some kind of change.
Yeah, we could come back in maybe February with an update.
I think so.
At least we'll have a month and say, hey, we've gotten
I
2
think
applications.
February is fine. Gives us a month to collect applications, if nothing else.
Sure, yeah.
And I think it also gives us the chance to explore some of these issues that looking at what exemptions we may have to make for landscaping and for looking into the affordable housing aspect of it.
Okay, finishing up my questions. Have we given, how much thought have we given to city services in terms of I don't know how much of the city has been repiped for water. I don't know what our current sewer capacities are. I know I've seen an awful lot of water projects of late, but how much thought and what kind of thought has been given to any of the impacts that this may have on our services?
Well, that's a good question. And, in the sense that we have kind of very limited time to enact something here before it goes in effect. These applications will get reviewed by our public works and engineering for water, sewer, all that sort of stuff. And again, knowing that we can't require offsite improvements like we would with roads or, major pipeline projects. So the assumption, we're kind of going off of is that we do have enough water to build new development. To what extent, I don't know where that caps out in Glendora, but that we approve other projects and they have water and sewer. So that kind of comes with the will serve letters that these and the sort of review by our internal engineering, public works, water, et cetera, that electricity too, Edison, that these units can be served. If it gets to a point where they cannot get those letters or cannot be served, then, as I think we talked last time, that is one category where these can be denied, is if there's some adverse impact that cannot be mitigated. So, if we're at a point where an additional unit, is the fly that breaks the camel's back and you cannot provide utilities to it, or due to some unique condition cannot in that area or land, then that unit could be denied. And we'll know that through the review process.
Yeah, okay.
And it would be a violation of building standards as well. Even putting aside the adverse impacts, the one thing that we can continue to do under SB 9 is make sure that building standards are enforced, and those include plumbing, sewer, drainage, etc.
Same with the building code too, like wind loading and health safety stuff, any of that sort of stuff. It has to still be a safe structure they build under SB 9.
Okay, I'm going to circle back with the, this is to me, a really important policy that we're embarked on here. So I'm going to circle back one more time. Commissioner Norwood, any parting shots here for Hans?
Yeah, I got a few comments. Reiterate from the other commissioners. It was a very detailed and well done presentation.
I agree.
Not just from Hans, but I know the amount of work that was put in by the staff. So I appreciate all that. When it first came last month, my initial reaction was, when I mean no variances, letter of the law. If they had a 20,000 square foot lot and split it into two 10,000 square foot lots, my initial reaction was to basically de-incentivize them from doing it and forcing them to build an 800 square foot structure on a 10,000 square foot lot. That was my initial reaction. After doing a considerable research and again looking at this presentation, I do like that going with the floor area ratio and providing the structures or the splits or following the state law, whether it's ADU, that more compatible to the neighborhood, more harmonious, so that you don't have this outlier of this little 800 square foot lot. 800 square foot structure on a bigger lot that just doesn't fit in the neighborhood. So I do like what has been presented here tonight as a policy moving forward. And as we talked about, it's a moving policy. It's a living document until an ordinance is put in place. As far as the low income housing and stuff like that, I'd like to avoid that at this particular point in this policy, because again, that is an ordinance driven issue. And this is a state law, and I certainly don't want the city to incur cost or staff time on trying to chase down what I think is going to be a small percentage of applications based on what we're hearing so far. I personally am still of the opinion that I don't think we're going to get a large number of applications just because it is cost prohibitive for the construction aspect of it, the tax ramifications of it. And the last thing I have on it is I pulled up the CAL FIRE high fire hazard zone, and that covers just about a third of our city. If you could pull it up on CAL FIRE and type in CAL FIRE higher fire zone for the city of Glendora, and you'll come up with a map. And we have a lot more input and say on that, both from a staff level and from a fire safety level. So it can be mitigated, but we do have more input, and that pretty much runs, you know, anything north of Sierra Madre and even south of Sierra Madre in certain spots, and all the way to the city border on the east side of the city along the golf course area is considered a high fire zone area. So I am in favor of the policy as presented to us tonight. If we do need to address other things of the low income housing, we continue to come back. We look at it in February, again in March if necessary. And as we move forward, I'm assuming we'll have a chance to have input on the ordinance that would be eventually adopted by city council. So those are my comments, and I think I'm in agreement of basically the draft policy that was presented, and also that was part of the agenda. So that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Norwood. Commissioner Becerra.
Hans, I do have one more question. When someone comes in, do they have to apply ministerially, or does this go directly to building and safety?
They'll have to do an application that will go through a ministerial administrative process. So there will be a planning review of what they want to do. And that kind of depends again on the type of SB 9 application. I mean, if it's going to be the lot split, then there's basically that parcel map process they're going to have to go through. If it's just an extra SB 9 unit, then that would be kind of more like the current ADU thing where they submit for a building permit, then we review it against the code for that.
So will we have the design review for the project, or will there not be a design review?
Design review for administrative?
Yes.
Yes, we'll be reviewing it. We look at the elevations for architectural compatibility, roof pitch, when all that sort of, same with whatever landscaping, parking, other things we end up with in there, we'll be reviewing for that sort of stuff with their submittal.
Okay.
Whether it goes either way, you know, if that'll either be on top of the parcel map application for the split, or if they don't go that route, that's basically what we'll get.
Does someone have to go through a sort of a zoning clearance before they can submit, or they'll just submit the application and you'll take care of the zoning right away?
Yes, we'll look up the zoning right away, because as part of the criteria, I mean, there's this whole list of things, but there, you know, in addition to that, like affidavits that, you know, if they want to demolish, nobody's rented, that sort of thing. We'll do like a sort of a due diligence check where we make sure that they're a single family zoning district, that they're not in a historic district. We also check like for high fire zones, make sure they're not in the high fire zones. That triggers other stuff. So yeah, that's part of our sort of initial review at the time they submit to determine if they can submit, basically.
I think, and just typically, just to jump in on this a little bit. So for example, the ADU application process, the planning's initial sort of zoning clearance is really just an over-the-counter review. There's no submittal of a separate application to planning before. So if someone wants to do an ADU, and I think the same will work for this type of project, because the standards are supposed to be objective and similar, that there'll be an over-the-counter review of the site plan, elevations, and then you go directly to get a building permit.
That's what my question was, right? Okay, got it. I just want to say, Hans, this is a great presentation. I thought you did a great job, and I think we're good. I'm good.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Becerra. Vice Chair Coffs.
Again, I just think it's really well thought out. I think I commend you for coming up with such a great proposal and presentation so quickly. I think in terms of, our discussion and what we have control over tonight, I'm good with that. I would like to see us explore that ordinance in the future in terms of the affordable housing. I think it's just a commitment that we need to make. But other than that, I think for right now, we can, I'm very good with the proposal.
All right, very good. Commissioner Ursetti.
Yeah, I would agree with Vice Chair Koss and Commissioner Norwood that to circle back to the affordable housing element of it, if that's at a later date, and kind of like you said, Chair Davis, if it's kind of a living document, if this is something that we need to get in place right now, we can visit and amend it for enhancements, I think, at a later time. But thank you again to the staff for getting this. There's nothing like having a law pass and then saying, oh, by the way, you got to get it done by January 1st. So thank you for all your hard work on this. I know it's on top of everything you guys have been doing. So everything looked really, really well thought out to me.
Okay, thank you. All right. A wise man once told me there's no such thing as an unreal expectation, only an unreal time frame. And I think that's what we have a lot of here. Hans, one last question and a quick statement. Can this at all interfere with the federal monument high up in the hills? Even if mitigation is available to said property, would the federal monument designation of a property have anything to do with it, if you even know?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if it's I don't know if that's similar to, if that would be treated the same. What do you think, Jeff?
I think Chair Davis is referring to designation of the San Gabriel Mountains as part of a federal monument. That's not something that's a consideration for a building permit application.
Okay, because I know it splits some lots up there. I mean, it crosses my lot. It bisects my lot. So I'm like, okay, I don't know if that'll affect me or not. And then I would just ask one last thing, as this is a living document. My fear with this is manipulation by unscrupulous people trying to work the system. I think you guys have done a wonderful job at mitigating a lot of my concerns for SB 9. But I'm sure there are smarter people who are more diligently working on ways to circumvent ordinances and policies that are being put in place, especially in their infancy. So I would just caution, look for ways that it can be manipulated, because that's where it'll fall apart. It may look good on the surface, but when they start manipulating it and things start to go to hell in a handbasket, that's where we're asking for trouble. All right, so with that said, I guess I need to request a motion to accept this this framework.
I'll make it that
I'll make a motion.
So can I
Make a
clarify?
motion to,
Hold on, we need a clarification here.
Yeah, just to clarify quickly, I thought I heard during the conversation that you all wanted for regular updates to be given to the commission starting February.
Yes.
So
Do we need to do date certain, Elvia?
No,
Okay.
starting February, regular updates to be given to the commission starting February, and to confirm the draft of SB 9 policy framework.
yeah, I'll make a motion to confirm the draft.
I will second the motion.
Okay, great. So that was from Kurt, correct?
Correct.
Wonderful. And then a second by Paulette. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I will take a roll call vote. Commissioner Norwood,
Yes.
Commissioner Ursetti,
Yes.
yeah, Commissioner Becerra,
Yes.
Vice Chair Koss,
Yes.
and Chair Davis.
Yes.
That passes 5-0. Thank you.
All right, well-oiled machine here. Okay, so item number 5, Mita Avenue and Bus Plaza conceptual improvements. I'd like to invite Transportation Manager Steve Mateer, I believe it is, to report, please.
Great. Thank you. My name is Stephen Mateer, the Transportation Manager. The item before you is to receive input and feedback on conceptual improvements to both Mita Avenue and the Bus Plaza. Next slide, please. This is the layout as we have it today. We're proposing to break up the plazas into 3 separate areas, so they each have a unique and distinct zone. And a little bit of background, these sections of META were closed during the pandemic to allow for outdoor dining. Since then, that's been pretty much a pretty successful businesses, as well as our permanent parklets that we built on Glendora Avenue. Looking forward now, META Avenue offers a way to get some additional public space in the village without acquiring any land, and is something that we've noticed that hasn't really had any significant impact and has had a lot of community support. Additionally is the bus plaza, which, as you know, that's the center of where pretty much the civic center and where major events like the tree lining occur, but it is generally not the most active or inviting space. So we're trying to find ways to activate the bus plaza as well. Next slide, please. These are the existing conditions with the outdoor dining, the planters, and some of the temporary lighting and shade structures. You see the bus plaza, that gives you a kind of example of the furniture and the layout of that plaza. Next slide, please. So breaking this down, we'll look at West META first. I know it's called Beer Garden. That was just the name the designers came up with. Really, the idea here is to have more of a pub game area so that families can have a meal and their kids can play, either during lunchtime or at dinner time. It really creates more of a draw here, which we've noticed this side of the street tends to be less utilized than East META. Another way to address that is to add overhead lighting and shade sails, excuse me. And then you see the area in the pink, that is where the outdoor dining for Sushi and I and for Sellers could go. Next slide. So in terms of the games that we're thinking of, these are some of the options. One that I think is really interesting, like mini golf or giant chess. These can also be rotated out quarterly to keep it fresh and keep it interesting. We did talk to a couple of the restaurants on both sides of the street. They are interested in helping manage the operation of these games. But really, we feel this is a way to have a really fun activity center in the village. Next slide. In terms of the outdoor dining, what we heard from both restaurants, at least on this side of the street, is that parklets aren't really the best fit for them. They would like something that's a little more flexible, such as picnic tables or movable tables, as you see on the bottom left there. One other option here is both restaurants have a pretty wide wall, and this is an opportunity for some public art, like a mural, which could reference the foothills or the village or other important Glendora cultural items. The bottom right is an example.
Please don't mural the brick wall of Frisella's.
I'm sorry?
Please don't mural the brick wall at Frisella's.
We'll note that. Thank you. The parklet in the bottom right is an example of what we have on Glendora Avenue. But as I mentioned, both restaurants in this plaza weren't very interested in that arrangement. Next slide, please. This is what we're thinking for shade sails. West META does have much more direct sunlight during the day. So we're thinking of either bolting the shade sails to the buildings or providing poles that are anchored into the sidewalk. And underneath that, we could layer in things like string lighting, as you see below. Next slide, please. East META area, we're thinking here this would be more of a lounge area. And the green area is where we'd have a kids play area. This could be a lawn or have some type of climbing structures. The top right is a lounge with fire pits. So that's one option. We know fire pits can be a little bit challenging. The idea here is we have something where people can just relax, grab ice cream, bring some coffee up, have a place to just relax and gather. The bottom right would be the outdoor dining area for T. Phillips. Here we'd add permanent string lighting across. The challenge here is that building setbacks would probably make it prohibitive to do bolted shade sails. So we're thinking umbrellas here, similar to what we have on Glendora Avenue. Next slide. In terms of the play structure, we could do something that's just as simple as an artificial lawn or turf. There are some more advanced options, which you see on the bottom left, excuse me, which is like a half pipe or arch. This allows for kind of an interesting space where kids and families can have a little bit of play area. We'd also look to continue some of the landscaping that we have with those big planters. Next slide. This is the outdoor dining. So again, talking to T. Phillips, they were very interested in having a parklet similar to what you see on the top right. Vestra, which is a company that made the parklets on Glendora Avenue, they actually have pre-built parklets, which T. Phillips would be in favor of. So that's another option to help with some more outdoor dining. The bottom right are the fire pit concepts we have. We're thinking here this would be something that could be designed so that people don't fall in, is easily managed. But again, we're open to suggestions, knowing that that can be an operational difficulty. Next slide. Again, here, this is some of the lighting we're thinking of in the shades. Umbrellas would probably be the easiest option here. One of the great things about the lighting is that you can do these string lights or architectural lighting along the different structures, which would create a really visual experience, and as well as doing the string lighting, which is currently out there. Next slide, please. This is the bus plaza. The idea here is to have a civic center feel, so to really capitalize on what it is really good at, what its purpose is right now. And we can accomplish that by cleaning up some of the furniture that's obstructing the use of the space, such as the trellises, some of the handrails, and some of the planters. Next slide. And we can recreate that by adding in public seating, or sorry, platform seating for performances, as well as potentially a stage deck, improve the lighting, and adding some interesting architectural features on the perimeter. Next slide. So some of the programming we're thinking of is having reading circles, the community theater, both of those. There is a theater in the downtown area as well as a daycare. This would be a great way to have some more activity in the bus plaza, as well as having more flexible seating or having this kind of modular seating structure, which can function both as a stage and a staging area for performances. This will also allow us to keep the Christmas tree lighting as well as other major events in the village. Next slide. In terms of lighting, again, this is a challenging area given the setbacks and some of the vertical needs of like the tree lighting. So we're thinking here is having string lighting that is on a post as well. I'm sorry, my assistant's joining me here. The other option too is the umbrellas or some type of artistic shade structure. But again, that would mostly be on the periphery due to some of the space needs and the programming needs of the bus plaza. Next slide, please. And so again, this is what we're thinking, at least in concepts, is having 3 separate plazas that are programmed differently and have kind of a unique feel to them. And the next slide. Again, looking for the commission's feedback and open for any comments or questions from the commission.
Okay, awesome. Hey, thank you. Thank you. I love fire pits. I personally volunteer to help put them in. The atmosphere that would bring to the downtown, you won't believe. Anyway, I'm going to start with Vice Chair Koss. Comments?
Well, I have to say, I absolutely love the idea. I've been downtown. I see how Mita is closed now, and it's utilitarian, but it's not really user friendly. And so I love all of these ideas. Just a couple of comments or questions, maybe. One of my concerns, as you probably can anticipate, given my history, is the parking issue. If we're having community theater or all these wonderful events, where are people? We already know that parking downtown has gotten more and more challenging. Has there been any kind of thought about where these people would park for those events?
That's a great question. I know from the various parking studies we've done, there is, I think there's more of a perception issue with actual quality of parking spaces in the village. So in that regard, one thing we've noticed is that with major events, there is plenty of periphery parking. It's just that, people have to walk a little bit to get there. We've seen that with the parklets as well. Despite having no parking right in front of restaurants, they're busier than they've ever been.
Okay, great.
We've seen
Great.
there is that it's really just, again, some of that perception of having to walk a little bit. Again, we also do offer things like shuttles. We're looking at doing other, improvements to hopefully help people not feel like they have to drive to the village.
Okay, sounds great. Yeah, I love the idea. The only other thing that ran through my head when you were talking about in one of the parklets or one of the sections having like a play area, does that cause any kind of additional liability issues for the city if somebody was on the play area and there was an accident or they got hurt or something? I assume that that's something that we've already considered.
Lana might have a better answer than me. I know generally that's probably covered by our insurance as well.
Okay, but otherwise, I think it's a great idea. I think it's wonderful to bring that community to downtown, and I think the concepts are incredible, and I can't wait to see them happen.
Thank you.
And I apologize, but yes, I concur with Steve's assessment that this is something that would be part of our insurance coverage, our citywide insurance coverage.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Becerra.
I really like this. Since we have put the seating out, we have spent way more time downtown, and I would like to see more activities downtown. I have 3 grandkids that I would love to take downtown more often. And I really like the fire pits. I love the fire pits, and I love the string lights. I really think they're very inviting. I really like it.
Beautiful. Commissioner Ursetti.
Yeah, thank you for that. Again, just like everyone else, I'm excited about this. I've loved that outdoor seating and blocking that off, and excited for it to be more permanent. The one question I had was, why did we decide to do the beer garden area on the west side as opposed to in front of the ale house on the east side?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the designer felt that having the games on the west side would help activate that area more, which we've noticed has struggled to be an activity center. T. Phillips has that really great outdoor patio, which I think kind of lends to that energy that you see there. So having a more dedicated area to play and activity, we felt would kind of balance out both plazas. But again, that doesn't mean that we couldn't have games on both sides. The lawn, it's easy to have cornhole or something like that.
Gotcha.
East Plaza as well. Sorry, my kid lost his tooth today, so he's very excited.
Oh, congrats, buddy!
That's a big.
Look at that.
That's a big event.
I hear the tooth fairy gives out $5 now.
He's been lobbying up much higher, so we'll see.
Yeah, inflation.
I thought I was doing you solid with $5. I'm sorry, Commissioner Rossetti, were you finished or you have more?
No, I had one more comment. Just to keep it, even and symmetrical, would it be possible, you said just for locating those sun sails, is it possible to put, poles in to do that just so it looks the same if you did sun sails on one side and then umbrellas on the other? Do we think that might look a little different? Or is that you're probably having to drill into the ground pretty deep to do that. Is that beyond what we're looking to do?
Yeah, I'd have to, consult what exactly the building will look like for lighting versus the shade sails. So I would say that we will endeavor to have it match as much as possible so that it's visually coherent.
Cool. Well, thank you. Really excited about all that.
All right, very good. Thank you, Commissioner Rossetti. Commissioner Norwood.
Great presentation by Stephen and his assistant, his toothless assistant. I think it's a great concept. My only concern would be to keep it. I'm trying to word it in such a way that it's stationary, but not to the point where we can't change it, let's say in 3 years, where instead of building fire pits with brick and mortar, that they're to the ground, but they're more able to be moved. In 3 years, we want a different concept. And we're kind of seeing that with the bus plaza, where we have to do some infrastructure, brick and mortar type stuff, to where if we try to create both the beer garden plaza and east and west side, something a little bit more, that if that concept is not, it's maybe tired and it's not as attractive, and it's not going to be a big deal to change things out. So I'm not a big fan of like the half tube and things that are going to be much more stationary. And the fire pits, I'd like to see them a little bit more. There's a lot of nice fire pits out there that are not brick and mortar that we can secure down. So yeah, overall, I think the presentation is good. I just like to see it a little bit more ability to change things in several years down the road. If the city decides that, hey, it's just getting old, a little tired. That's all.
Great. Excellent comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Norwood. I want to second Commissioner Norwood's thoughts on that. I had that written down as well. I don't want to say portability. That's not really what I want to use, but you don't want something that's extremely static. And like he said, if you don't want something that you have to move a gas line or do too much to change the configuration as times change. And given what COVID has done to us in the last couple of years, you never know what could come our way. Speaking of COVID, leave that aside for a second. Is there a time frame for this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Right now, once we get the feedback from the commission, I think we'll go to council in January just to get their buy-in and some feedback from them. We have the designer is under contract to do design plans, which we can then go out to bid. There is some coronavirus relief money made available for public improvements in the village, which should pay for this. So I would say 18 months is kind of my timeline, internal timeline.
Okay.
I'll add too, we did get a grant to buy or to have furniture loaned to the city, similar to the bike lane, where we can demonstrate, test out different furniture concepts in Mita Avenue. So that'll be really exciting, and it's the same company that made the parklets, so it'll look pretty similar to what we have out there.
I've noticed we spend a fair amount of time downtown, and I noticed immediately when Mita was closed off, a different vibe to the downtown. That lack of cross traffic is huge, absolutely huge. I'm in favor of never opening it, to cross traffic again. I'm sure others would disagree with me, but I think it's a huge benefit to have no cross traffic from Foothill to is it Bennett up there? I think that's an enormous benefit. And I don't know if I mentioned that I love fire pits, but I'm willing to help with anything that's fire pit related. The vibe it would bring to the downtown, I think you will all be amazed. So in terms of, let's talk alcohol for a second. One of my favorite subjects. How does the city feel about moving alcohol to the center of those streets? You mentioned beer garden, and that's kind of an overriding. I know that's just a name that you applied to it. But let's say, for instance, if you try to limit alcohol from going into those streets out of T. Phillips or Frisella's or the Japanese restaurant, I know they can do it on the sidewalks now because I've had wine on the sidewalks. What's the feeling on that? How would that go?
That's a great question. I think right now we want to take the stance that whatever helps the restaurants and is also in compliance with ABC, that's the kind of line we want to walk. So I know with for T. Phillips, for example, if we have a parklet deck out there, we could do an extension of premise to cover that parklet, which they could serve alcohol to that area. I don't know that we want to have an alcohol area with the play structure or the fire pit area. I know that gets into some of that issue with ABC. Correct. They like to have stuff roped off. And so that gets a little bit harder to police. So I think, and Jeff, feel free to jump in because you know much more about the ABC process than I do. But again, I think on the Frisella and Sushi and Ice side, that's a little bit more difficult because it's a much more open space. And I'm not sure how we could accomplish that, but I think it's something to look into.
No, Stephen, I think you've answered the alcohol question really well and complete. The only thing I would add is that the The ABC, the state, has actually relaxed some of their standards temporarily. It's still in effect to serve alcohol in the public right of way using parklets. But we will have to work with them on making some of these permanent, them being working with ABC to continue to allow it into the future.
But basically, they could come back at any time in the future and say, hey, we're going back to the old ways.
You know, they could, I think, but the old ways, meeting their regular standards, they don't. What ABC tends to be concerned about in the past, not in this COVID environment, is when you have servers carrying alcohol to serve that is off premises into, you know, through a public area into another seating area. They want all of these areas to be contiguous and controlled. So I think it limits the you know, the potential to be passing alcohol around outside of a ABC permitted area. And so we'll have to, you know, work with them on figuring out a way to have the area regulated and controlled in a manner that ABC would be able to, you know, issue their permit.
Because I think if you start to limit it, person from going to the fire pit and sitting down with their glass of red wine, you start to limit some of the attractiveness of said area.
I agree.
Yeah, no, we do too. I think, but it's important to remember, I think sometimes people assume that it's actually the city that issues alcohol permits. And while we have some control, we, the city, has some
No. I know it's ABC, but I'm just asking, you know, because it's going to flow through us to them, and then they're going to render a judgment, you know, one way or another. So that's my input on that. So Frisella's, and I apologize for not remembering the name of the Japanese restaurant, and T. Phillips, they're all on board with this largely?
Yeah, we've met with all the restaurants as well as Kathy's Wishing Well, which is the toy store just to the north, right across from T. Phillips. Yeah, all four are in favor of what we're doing, and we actually briefed the bid last week, I believe, on this, and similar comments to, you know, supportive, you know, wanting to make sure that the space is used properly and, you know, is maintained well. They're very focused on the maintenance of this area.
Is there a budget for this?
I believe we have a 1.25 million. For this, that would include us, you know, doing any engineering that we have to do,
Right.
Improvements. But that's the budget. Recall.
My last question is, and I don't know how much of a study has been done in terms of, I know when COVID first happened and dining moved outside, outside was packed. Dining has tended to move inside, and it's not as packed out there anymore. What, and not demographics, but what we're hoping that these improvements will bring more people to come dine, not only inside, but outside as well. Given COVID and all of its mutations that seem to be happening somewhat regularly, is this still viable? I say, how does COVID affect its viability, I guess is what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'll relate it to the experience we had with the Parklet, which is we did a one-day demo back in 2019, which feels forever ago, in front of Classic Coffee. And they said, yeah, we'll do it for one day, but don't ever do this again. And then when we did the temporary Parklet and the permanent one, they said this was what saved their business, and, you know, they really having it. So I think with that being said, you know, we've seen that generally being outdoors is considered a safer activity. It's safer. And we've also seen too, you know, Jeff and I did outreach at the flashback over the summer. And I think one of the consensus points was, you know, really a desire for more public space in the village, you know, really a central civic center, or, you know, a gathering plaza that, you know, families could come in, you know, and hang out, have fun. And so I think COVID for all the, the pain it's caused. That's one of the nice things we've realized. We do have great public and outdoor spaces in Glendora. It's really nice to be outside. And I know, as you said, Tiffany, the parklets aren't as busy as they were, but I still think, restaurants are still doing really good business, and they like having extra seating to use.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for the presentation. Certainly appreciate it. And if I didn't say it before, I'll say it again. I love fire pits.
I was just going to ask, are there going to be fire pits? Because I heard Commissioner Davis just loves fire pits.
I was on the
Please,
fence about it. I'm not sure now. I don't know.
Please, I hope that there's fire pits. And I heard
There
he
you go.
volunteered. I heard he volunteered to put them
There you
in
go.
too.
Hey, I wanted to put one where they're selling the Christmas trees, but they sell Christmas trees. So, they should have one while they sell Christmas trees. That
There we go. I like that.
Yeah. All right. So at this point, I guess we're accepting this. I guess I need a motion to accept.
I will make that motion.
I will second it.
Thank you. So that was a motion by Vice Chair Koss and a second by Chair Davis. I will take a roll call vote to receive and file the report. Commissioner Norwood,
Yes.
Commissioner Ursetti,
Yes.
Commissioner Becerra,
Yes.
Vice Chair Koss,
Yes, especially if it has fire pits.
and Chair Davis.
Took the words right out of my mouth. Yes.
That passes 5-0. Thank you.
All righty. All right. So ending on that fire pit note, do we have anything for the good of the order from the commissioners?
None for me. Thank you.
Hearing none, do we have anything for the good of the order from staff?
I would, since this is our last meeting of 2021, I just wanted to wish everyone a happy holidays, happy new year, and we'll see you all in 22.
Awesome. Thank you for
Great.
that. Lana, anything for the good of the order?
No, I will just hear what Jeff said.
All righty. With that in mind, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and see you all in 2022.
Bye, everybody. Happy holidays.
Bye.
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.